to live your life like you're in an early 2000s rom-com. I think that one of the biggest reasons that people miss the early 2000s rom-coms so much is because life in them actually felt alive. The women in those movies and shows, they had personality. Their flats that they lived in had character. Their outfits they wore were fun. They went places. People would speak on the phone for hours. You got ready properly, even just to go out for coffee, and everything about that time just felt warmer, slower, more feminine and more social. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing, because now everything feels very same haircut. Everyone has the same haircut, same hairstyle, same neutral beige outfit, the same AirPods, iced matcha, beige apartment aesthetic. And while everyone does look aesthetically pleasing, they also look emotionally exhausted. So this video is basically about how to bring that early 2000s rom-com feeling back into your actual life. And how do you do that? Well, one of the first ways is by developing an actual personal style again. And when I say this, I don't mean that you suddenly have to be a walking Y2K costume. It just means that you dress for how you actually like to dress rather than trying to please the algorithm. I mean, if you think of all the women from the 2000s movies and TV shows, you think of women like Gabrielle Solis from Desperate Housewives, Samantha Jones from Sex and the City, Andy Anderson from How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, early Kim Kardashian, pre-Kanye, her style was amazing, J-Lo and all of her early rom-coms, all of the women from Sex and the City, even Jennifer Aniston when she was playing Rachel Green in Friends, and early Mariah Carey. In fact, even Mariah Carey now, they all looked, all of these women, what they had in common was that they looked like actual individuals. They all wore things like baby doll tops, fitted dresses. Does anyone remember the famous bandage dress? I think that's making a bit of a comeback, and I, for one, I loved those dresses. They wore things like little cropped jackets, little cropped denim jackets with the cropped sleeves, big oversized sunglasses. My personal favourite was the clog mule heels, if anyone remembers these. I know they have a modern version of them, but I love these with a pair of straight leg jeans. They were supreme. Low-rise jeans, on that subject, they wore low-rise jeans. Body shimmer was everywhere. You glittered everywhere you went. On that topic again, glittery, shiny lip gloss, that was all the rage. Cute little shoulder bags, and another one of my favourites was fascinating belts. Belts were the biggest way to accessorise back then. You had all different styles, types, shapes, colours. It was amazing for adding just that little bit of oomph to any outfit. And I think now everything is all about quiet luxury, the clean girl aesthetic, and the capsule wardrobe. I mean, back then nobody had a capsule wardrobe. That wasn't really a thing. You bought what you liked, what you seen in stores, what was fun, what you could have fun pairing with other things. That was how things were done. And if you look at all of the early 2000 shows and movies, that's the way they dressed. I mean, it's kind of as if now everyone is sharing the one communal Pinterest personality, and the women in these films actually looked like themselves. They didn't just look like clones of everyone else. And honestly, I think that back then people were happier when they didn't have to try to look effortlessly perfect all the time. And another thing about women in the early 2000s rom-coms, they actually enjoyed getting ready, and I feel like that's something we've lost a bit. It's now as if everyone wants to look like they woke up naturally glowing with the perfect slick back bun and almost clinically hydrated skin. Meanwhile, early 2000s women were absolutely committed to the routine. We were committed to getting ready. We done the big shiny lip gloss, didn't matter if it was windy. That was the go-to. You applied it in public, you didn't care. We had the big hair. We had the body sprays, and they weren't always expensive body sprays. It was impulse body sprays, and those were big. We had the compact mirror that would be set up on the window ledge to do our makeup in natural light. That's how we did it. And if you watch a lot of the early movies, they don't have the big fancy get up set up for doing makeup. This is how they did their makeup, at the window ledge with a tiny mirror. We layered tank tops. Think of the scene in The Devil Wears Prada, the first movie, where Andy, pre-montage, makeover montage, when she's in the apartment and she's getting ready and she's pulling on the two vest tops. That's what we did, only we did it a little bit better than that. We didn't just put two plain white vest tops together. It was fun. Fashion was actually fun. We used excessive amounts of hairspray to the point where it almost became like a second perfume. We had the statement jewellery, the big earrings, the long necklaces. At one point I remember even having hoops so big that they would touch my shoulders. We had cute little handbags, little shoulder bags that were crammed with absolutely everything inside them, including our iconic flip phones that now everybody wants again. When we got ready, and when you see the girls in the movies getting ready, they're not getting ready to get ready with me videos on TikTok. They're not getting ready to clean girl YouTube videos, or definitely not true crime podcasts. We didn't even have things like that back then. We listened to CDs of our favourite bands, and we would sing and dance along to them while we were getting ready. We would have our glass of Lambrini in an oversized wine glass that was almost like a fishbowl, and we would be getting changed and changing out of dresses, tops a dozen times through the night to only end up wearing the first thing that we put on. And you know what, it was fun. And if you look at all these montages in these movies when the main character is getting ready, it is fun. It looks like fun. There was lots of personality to it. Like I said, people checked their lip gloss in public. They didn't care about how it looked. You would stop, you would pull out your compact mirror, reapply your lip gloss. We carried giant handbags around for no reason, just because. We wore perfume and body sprays just to go to the corner shop to buy milk. And just life felt a lot more playful than what it is now. It seems like everything is required to be this perfect little uniform, and if you don't quite fit that, then you're not seen as the cool girl. Whereas back then, anything sort of went, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing. Even the homes in the early 2000s felt better. They felt lived in. It's things like having movie posters framed on your bedroom wall. If you watch a lot of the movies, you'll see things like that. They have fashion books and magazines dotted around the place, and they're not only used for decor, they're actually read. Their homes and their flats had colour. They would have candelabras that had so much wax dripping from them that it was like its own piece of art. They have interesting bedding, big fluffy cushions and pillows, faux fur throws draped across the bottom. Our headboards and our bed frames were used to house our scrunchies, our hair clips. Sometimes they would even have our handbag hanging on the end of it. And we had a chest of drawers where we would have trays placed on top that would hold our perfumes, our jewellery, even our keys, and we would have Polaroid photos unframed leaning against cans of hairspray. And we made our own mood boards, and you see this in a lot of the early 2000 movies as well, creating your own mood boards before they were even a thing properly. And how you would do this is by cutting pieces out of magazines that you liked and pinning them on the wall above your bed in whatever order you liked. There was no order to it, it was just however was pleasing to your eye. You didn't need a tutorial on it, you just did what pleased you, because it's about you, your personality and your character and the things that you like, rather than being a carbon copy of what everyone else is doing. And we had our lamps were fun lamps, like things glittery lava lamps that were fun and added to the atmosphere of the room. When we had flowers, we didn't need a big aesthetic vase for them to go in. Half the time they were kept in a jug or even a favourite mug. And I feel like now everyone is just so obsessed with having everything look minimal and perfect that half the time a lot of people's homes don't even look like a human being lives or exists in there. Whereas the early 2000s and all of these movies, they had warmth and you could tell what kind of women lived there. And I think that's what's missing now. Everything just looks so empty, so unlivable, so bland. And something else I noticed about all the early 2000s shows and movies is that people in them actually participated in life. If you watch them and actually take notice, they would walk places and take in the scenery. There would be no rushing about it. They browsed bookstores for hours. They would sit in cafes just to people watch. Something I love to do is I love to sit in cafes and people watch and just make up stories in my head about what I imagine these people's lives to be. I just find it fun and it takes you out of your own head for a minute. People went shopping for fun and they got dressed up to do it. Shopping back then was a whole event in itself, where you would get dressed up, you would meet your friends, you would go for lunch in the food court there and just get a cheap little lunch, but it was fun. It had colour to it. People drove around listening to music just for the sake of it, and like that you'd meet up with your friends constantly. That was a big part of life. People went on little outings for no reason at all. You would have picnics in the park. You would go to parks and wander around, and just there wasn't people filming, there wasn't people taking photos. People were just in the moment of what they were actually doing. Whereas now people spend half their lives lying in bed scrolling while watching other people live instead of living their own lives. And I genuinely think that's part of why so many people feel disconnected from themselves now. And your life, it starts to feel very flat when you're only consuming life instead of participating in it. One of the biggest things that I personally do to bring that feeling back is to soundtrack my life. And I know that sounds probably a bit silly or dramatic, but I genuinely mean it. I will listen to a lot of soundtracks, like Father of the Bride soundtracks, holiday soundtrack, the Sex and the City movie soundtracks. I listen to Sade a lot. Her vibe is just early 2000s. It's very chilled, it's very chic, but it's fun also. Early Mariah Carey is other ones that I love listening to. There's just something about her music, her beats, her vibe that takes you back to that era. And I'll listen to these while driving through very scenic places, and it just helps to completely change the whole moment of it. And that's something that I think early 2000s films and shows did very well, was they made ordinary life feel very cinematic, where even little things felt important. A coffee run felt important. Walking, if you watch the movies, a lot of them take part in New York, and it's no wonder why, because walking through New York felt important. Getting ready to go out for dinner felt important, and whereas now everybody's just rushing through everything or using everything for content, and rather than just experiencing that moment and living it. And another thing is that people used to let themselves enjoy femininity more openly, and I know that online femininity in some cases is almost like a bad word. It gets a lot of bashing, because nowadays everybody acts like caring is too embarrassing, which I find actually embarrassing, to admit that you care about things and that you have feelings. I don't go in for all that. But if you look at the early 2000s women, they wore the shiny glittery lip gloss and applied it in public. Like I said, they carried the colourful bags. It didn't matter if it was the trending bag of the moment or not. They carried it regardless, because it was part of who they were. It was their character, it was their way of expressing themselves. They curled their hair with cheap tongs. It wasn't about whether you had the most expensive tools or could do the best curls. You did what you did with what you had and what your skills were, and it worked. People wore pink without it being a whole, oh, you're one of those girls. We layered perfumes. We wore heels to dinner. I mean, back then I wore heels just about every single day. That was just the way it was. We accessorised properly. People that watch Sex and the City nowadays, a lot of people that weren't old enough to watch it at the actual time think that the accessories in it are over the top and very out there, which wasn't the case, because people actually accessorised like that in the early 2000s. Yes, they were still slightly extravagant for their time, but that's what people did. Accessorising was a huge thing back then. Everything wasn't just a simple uniformed outfit. We always added accessories. Accessories were huge. And the thing about all these movies and these shows in the early 2000s women was that they enjoyed glamour. And I think that life became a lot more boring when everybody started trying to look so low effort all the time. I don't do low effort. Sometimes I can look like it's low effort, but believe me, there's not low effort. I am high maintenance, and I don't mind admitting that. I'm not going to make out that it takes me 5 minutes to get ready and I just throw something on, because that's absolutely not the case. I'm not going to play down who I am, what I am, to suit any trend or narrative. I like glamour, I am high maintenance. And I think the biggest thing that people miss from the early 2000s rom-coms is this. It's that life back then and in those movies felt very emotionally textured. People had routines. They had favourite cafes that they would frequent. They had messy flats. Their home wasn't a showroom. It was lived in. It was experienced. Fun nights out where we actually danced. We didn't sit around feeling embarrassed about dancing or thinking it was cringe to dance. I don't even think we used the word cringe. I don't think that was even a thing. The whole idea of going out was to dance. We had complicated friendships. Yes, that didn't mean we cut everyone off. It didn't mean that we labelled everything toxic or everyone toxic, because people can be complicated. Obviously, if someone is absolutely draining you and bringing nothing but chaos to your life, that is toxic. But nowadays, I feel like everything is labelled toxic. If someone who's supposed to be your friend doesn't live exactly the way you do, or do the things you do, or isn't available at the snap of your fingers when you want them to — I'm doing that when I can't even snap my fingers — then everyone wants to say, oh, that's not a friend, that's toxic. Whereas that wasn't a thing back then. We didn't say that. You had issues with your friends. If you're true friends with someone, you will have issues with them. It's how you deal with those issues that will define and make the friendship. We didn't just toss people aside like they were nothing. We had dinner parties that would start off with it be supposed to be a dinner party, and it would wind up being a group of girls sitting on the rug in front of a fire eating takeaway pizza. And we had shopping days. Like I said, the shopping days were actual full events. We got up, we got dressed, we done our hair, our makeup to go shopping. It was a whole thing. We would get snacks, we would go to every shop and try on all that we liked. With half the time we weren't even going to buy half of it, but half the fun was in trying on the clothes and then going back to the first shop that you'd been in to buy something. Even if you only bought one thing, it just felt like a whole worthwhile experience. Like I said, we would make lunch, we would go to the food court, or like that your local pub in town for lunch. That's what you did. We had long phone calls. Yes, we had texting back then, but it wasn't such a big thing. When you wanted to communicate with someone, we had long phone calls. That was a whole night in itself, where you would be on the phone to your friend for hours discussing everything and anything. We had playlists, like I said, listening to our favourite bands. We would listen to late night love radio stations just because of the mood. It was just good music. We had personality. And I think that life now feels very optimised. It's all very filtered, very detached. And I think genuinely that a lot of people are craving that sort of warmth again from the early 2000s. And when I say that, I don't think that people actually miss the early 2000s in itself, as in the year. I think they miss things like personality, glamour, warmth, individuality, which is a huge thing that's missing nowadays, atmosphere, participation, femininity and fun. And I personally think it's about time that we started bringing some of that back. So stick around, because I'm thinking of making this a series about how to embrace a lot more of the vibe of the early 2000s. So that's it for another video. If you like this, remember to subscribe and stay tuned for the next one. Until then,